Thank you for staying with us. You're still live on the AM show. We get into our big story, starting with this first one, Accra floods. Now, the Auditor General's report paints a gory picture about the Hydrological Services Department. The Auditor General carried out an audit at the offices of the HSD in Accra and selected storm drains construction sites throughout the country between July and September 2020. It makes for interesting reading because over these 4 or 5 years, the report says the HSD did not produce drainage master plans to guide the coordinated development of drainage facilities. Now, during the audit period, 12.2 kilometers, that is 11% of the targeted 110 kilometers of drains was constructed, and none of the retention ponds targeted for 18 drainage basins had been done. The question is why? We'll break it down for you this morning as we host our guests. Engineer Abdullahi Mahama is a road consultant. Dr. Achian Dakwa is a road consultant as well, and Dr. Anthony Chumesi is a hydrologist, Kumasi Technical University. But before we get to them, how about what's right here behind me? So these are some succinct details about the report, and that's the performance audit report on the provision of flood control drains in Ghana. And look at that whopping sum, 117.7 million Ghana cedis. That is the amount pumped into the construction and maintenance of drains and culverts between 2015 and 2019. Now, when you look at that same report in terms of the construction of drains in the affected years, 2015 to 2019, in kilometers. Now, look, this is what was completed versus what the target was. So the target was 110 of these. But guess what happened? We only were able to get 12.2. Look at the difference in there. And again, that is sourced from the Auditor General's report. Now, in terms of the construction of retention ponds, and if you know anything about preventing flooding, you would know the use of retention ponds, areas designated for this. We completed nothing, zilch, zero. The target was 18. Let's go to the next slide and find out what more the Auditor General's report reveals. Now, other findings from that report. One, the Ministry of Works and Housing, which plays a crucial role in all of this, did not maintain completed and existing drains because maintenance was not prioritized. It was not a priority for the ministry. So that's the first point to note. The second point, each year from 2015 to 2019, the HSD significantly fell short of implementing their target of drainage facilities needed to mitigate flooding nationwide. No wonder we are where we are. So, to the third and fourth points, now most construction works could not be completed due to the allocation of insufficient budget. Again, money matters coming to the fore to cover the planned length of drains, and the Ministry of Finance did not release funds on time to complete drainage projects, causing the projects to stall. Crucial points to take note of about why we are where we are. But let's look at the flooding impact 2015 to 2019. Total recorded floods, we're looking at a whopping 1,446 in a matter of 4 years. You're looking at the injuries, those who have suffered injuries, 309 citizens, and then the deaths, 510. 510 lives lost within this period. We'll move on to the next slide for a bit more of a breakdown. When you look at the houses that have been inundated over the period, we're looking at 54,744, almost 55,000. You look at farmlands destroyed as a country with an agricultural backbone, 136,563. And that is the statistic in terms of houses and farmlands that have been destroyed. Again, we'll look at the number of people who have been affected since 1960. Some of you may have seen images from the Daily Graphic in 1960 talking about flooding. So between then and now, 4 million, over 4 million people have been affected, and about this 4 million number forms about 12% of our current population. That is how stark the situation is. And this is sourced from the UN Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs. Now, you also look at the economic damage that has been caused, and it is approaching a whopping 1 billion. In fact, it exceeds 780 million dollars. We're looking at what? I mean, when you put this figure into cedis, off the top of my head, this would be approaching something around 5 to 6 billion cedis. And at least one major flood disaster has occurred every year over the past 10 years. So you're looking at the last 10-year period, and every year we have at least one major flood. How does that make any sense? But that is our situation here as a country. You also look at this. A quarter of the country is below sea level, a great cause for concern, and 60% of its people in flood risk areas. But the measures it has taken have reduced the likelihood of major flooding. But take note of that statistic. 60% of our people a quarter of the country is below sea level. That's the first part. So 1/4 below sea level. It means that if sea levels get to a certain point, most of these people are going to be affected. And 60% in flood risk areas. That is how stark the situation is. So God forbid, if we were to have some of those, terrible situations like we see in other parts of the world, how would we fare? And our final bit, research shows that for every $1 spent on flood risk reduction, it saves, I'm talking about the HSD, at least $4 to $9 otherwise spent in emergency response when disaster occurs. So we have NADMO and the rest and all their work, and they're always complaining about logistics. But the point is that if we invested $1, would get the equivalent of $4 or $9 in what we could save from managing the disaster. This, Ghana 4, is where we find ourselves. So let's get into that discussion now with our guests. I'll take my seat and then we'll get into that discussion. Right, so we're hosting Engineer Abdullahi Mahama. He is a road consultant. We also have Dr. Anthony Chumesi, a hydrologist with the Kumasi Technical University, among others who are joining the conversation with us this morning. So let's get into the nitty-gritty now. And like I said, it makes for very interesting reading what exactly is happening. We also have Dr. Achian Dakwa joining the conversation. But let me start with Engineer Abdullahi Mahama. When you look at the script, the tale of the tape, what we are seeing as far as the HSD is concerned, what we should have been doing, we are not doing. What is your initial analysis of this report by the Auditor General? Hello, Engineer Mahama, if you could unmute, we'd be grateful.
Right. Is it okay?
It's better now. I can hear you, sir.
Right. I'm saying a good morning to your cherished viewers.
Right.
I know it's not a pleasant good morning to those who are in Accra. Some of us have intentionally left Accra proper because of the indiscipline and lack of supervision. And so sadly, it will get to a time that a lot of people would have to relocate from Accra because of the challenges that will be faced. The news, I read the story, the report. In fact, the whole of the weekend I've been on the reports, and it's not encouraging, like you rightly said. The report is not encouraging. I wouldn't want to blame the Hydrological Service Department, which is an agency under the Works and Housing Ministry. So it is like how much money is given to the that ministry, and how much trickles down to the agencies underneath the ministry. You recall that I have been on this campaign for such a long time, and we are not giving up until when we are too fed up to stop one day. You look at the government approach, which I've always been emphasizing, that the report doesn't have, even if you're having issues in one particular sector, and your effort is under 15%, 1.5, you expect to have a different results? Absolutely not. If you look at the figures, we are churning out 117 million Ghana cedis for projects, and you have 102 kilometers of drains to be completed, and you do under 11%, or just approximately 11%. You don't expect to have a different result, especially when your population is growing that fast, when development is growing that fast. I mean, private development, and the government's aspect of catching up with the development is rather retrogressing in terms of progress or percentage-wise. Before I just forget, you made mention of a quarter of our land
Yes.
being low-lying below the sea level.
Exactly.
Fortunately for us, like we've been saying all the time, Accra is, okay, yes, greater part of Accra is under the sea in terms of the level, but we are surrounded by a mountainous area. So in the event where we have the depletion of the ozone layer increasing with time, and we are not able to protect the shore of the land, as the sea, the shore from Axim to Afrao, and there's an ingress of water into the lands, at least right from McCarthy Hills through Pukwase and its environment to Ibri. It's hundreds of meters above the sea level. So we may be relieved from those who are beyond that, and some portions of Accra, which will suddenly become islands because of the elevations. Like I've been saying, when I had the interview with you on the Glife, so we have two issues here. The flood is coming from more or less directly from the top, and we're having water from upstream coming downstream, which we are not controlling. And then the sea is also increasing because of the depletion of the ozone layer, so also encroaching or taking part of the land. We are being confronted with two scenarios in this case: the McCarthy Hills, the Pukwase, the Amasaman, the Brekuso, the Ibri, the Teman, Abukobi, Piduasi, Ayimensa stretch, which brings a lot of runoff, flash floods to Accra. Immediately it rains. And then our sea is also encroaching, taking part of the land right from almost all the low-lying area. The Volta region is now been spared for the past few months, if not a year. And then the Gilife around Dansuman is also another issue that we are contend with. So we have a problem. And if we try to do a disjointed approach towards getting the problems resolved, this is where we're going to be. And I am very glad that Joy has a good record of almost every pronouncement that I've made over the past years. And like I said last 2 years, when I said that we are sinking money down the drain, it has come to pass. You are digging the Odo when it has started raining. Like the other dinner said that monies are not released on time. In fact, in 2019, somewhere in April, that was when the then minister for sanitation, Cecilia Dapa, was giving 197 million Ghana cedis, including money for the silting of the Odo. April 9th, when we know that the rains have already come, we are not giving the sector minister money to start with the desilting. And I keep on saying that nobody carries silt. Let's be clear on this. The Odo is underperforming due to the volume of silt that has occupied the space. Now, if you have not done that one, the Odo itself is part of the buffer that you are talking about. Over 18 buffer areas have not been touched. Your water that runs onto the surface has increased because individuals are tiring their compounds with impunity. The laws are not quick enough to be just amended to cater for the problem, the challenges that we are having in the country. As if we want to go by 1970 law, when the situation now demands amendment of current situation that we have in the country, where a bylaw could just be taken by almost all the assemblies that about 70% of your land, bare land within your compound, had to be grassed, so that we would have a lot of infiltration of the water. Government is not sending the bylaws, which is even easier for them to do without so much money. At the same time, they have not created the 18 identified or areas located to be used for the buffer, where you have, say, let's say you are receiving more than 20 million liters of water runoff. So the buffer area is a channel that you have to locate, as in knowing the higher elevation toward the lower elevation, and the waters are supposed to move in that direction to be stored, to be contained in the buffer so that they don't overflow their banks immediately and then become like flash floods and then inundate the whole surface. So if you have identified 18, you expect about 20 million liters, as an example, 20 million liters of water. So your buffer is about 18, which can take more than 20 million liters of water. It means that there will not be that devastation when the waters come. Now, out of the 18, you have not done even one. And you want to say that because of the indiscipline of the individuals, like I said, you have surface waste on the Odo, but if 60-70% of the Odo is silted, you have to go to upstream and see what is happening upstream. And I'll keep on until this is education get to the listening ears of those who matter, the policymakers. All the other panels who are going to speak this morning, we are educating and enhancing the education to the populace so that they will be abreast with the information. But we cannot step in, backed by the constitution of the country, to take measures as to how to eliminate these bottlenecks or some of these issues which have been on our shelf for more than 20 years. In fact, if you look at the report, in 2018, one of the worst, I think from 2018, you look at the figures that you were channeling on your platform.
Right.
If you look at, example, just one example, about the same reports. Let me look at this one. Construct primary storm drains. Targets 20 kilometers. Actual 0.1. That's 100. You're talking about 20 kilometers, and you have done 0.1 actual.
Right.
In 2016, you are supposed to do 20 kilometers. You do 0.4. In 2017, you're supposed to do 30 targeted. You do 0. In 2018, you're supposed to do 20 kilometers. You did 1.3. In 2019, we're supposed to do 20 kilometers. And that's the only time that I saw quite a significant progress, which is 10.4. Out of the 110, you have done 12.2.
Right.
How do you expect that the floods will not inundate people and cause more devastation in Accra? That's the question we have to ask them.
All right. Engineer Mahama, hold for me. Let me also bring in Dr. Anthony Chumesi, who is a hydrologist at the Kumasi Technical University. It makes for even more stark reading as I go through other facts and figures concerning flooding, 1968 to 2011, and the fact that about 3.8 million Ghanaians as of then had been displaced, in terms of, flooding in our country. But we also know that there are natural factors and then there are the anthropogenic factors like poor urban planning and all of that. But for you, if you look at the situation like we're painting, like the Auditor General's report paints, that from 1960 till now, this problem still festers. Doesn't make any sense to you?
Good morning to everybody, good morning to the viewers and all those who are listening. The issue about flooding, to me, has been more of an hydrological problem, because most of the solutions have been engineering in nature. Why am I saying this? The main thrust of the flooding that we have had in this country has been the fact that we always think of designing drainage to suit the flood which may come. But do we think of the hydrology aspect of it? People just decide to do, engineers decide to go to the field. They may not be hydrology. They don't know the volume of water which might happen, and they don't know the runoff relationship. So what they tend to do is only to say that they're using some kind of formula to design a drainage system. This may not be the main thrust of the challenge that we have. The problem is that if we remove vegetative cover, if you don't plan properly, if we increase paved areas, definitely we are going to have a lot of water volumes coming out from after a certain rainfall. So what we need to do is, as a matter of fact, to look at what these personnel can help to come up with proper solutions. Look at even the way we design the drainage systems. Are we thinking about the various hydrological parameters? Do we think about the environmental issues? People just decide to put dispose solid waste into the gutters. the drainage systems, are we able to go back to see whether that particular drainage system is able to contain the flood? All what you do is that year out, we just come to see that there is a problem. And the problem, we discuss about it and then we go off. If you go to even the National Hydrological Service now, you can see that the leadership is more interested in something like the coastal defense works, and the hydrology is thrown to somewhere else. Nobody, if you go to regions, you'll be amazed to see that even in the regions, they don't have hydrologists in the regions. Virtually, there's nothing that is happening in terms of the hydrology aspect.
Break it down for us. Break it down for us, Doc. How relevant? What is the work of a hydrologist, and how relevant are you, especially in a country like ours where we are flood prone? Just in a very short period, break it down for us so we have a perfect understanding.
Yeah. What I'm saying, I guess the hydrologist is supposed to know the movement of water through every system. He's somebody who knows how, after a rainfall, the processes that the water may go through before it goes back away to the atmosphere. He knows that when this amount of rainfall happens, this precipitation happens, he knows that if you take the infiltration amount of water which goes into the groundwater systems, he's able also to know that based on specific formulae, he could know that this is the surface runoff that's going to happen. So he can decide based on the vegetation, based on every structure that happens, he can understand that this is the way that the water flooding can happen.
Okay.
So
now that you've clarified that, how many of you are in Ghana, so to speak? How many of you are practicing? Do you know?
I doubt if we are even up to about 10 now, because in this country, we don't train hydrologists per se. All students are trained as civil engineers, and they take maybe 2 hours per week to do maybe a 1-year program, and that's all. So they don't practice hydrology.
So that's,
those who are
that's a failure. That's a failure right there, right? In a country that has experienced the sort of flooding we've seen since independence, it means that we should have cast our mind to hydrologists. And you're saying there are no more than 10 of you in the country. It points to our failure as a country, doesn't it?
Oh, yes. The reason is that, you see, that's something that if we decide to on this trajectory, that we don't even recognize the role of the hydrologists in these things, I'm telling you, my brother, these things will bound to happen. And what we need to do now is that we must ensure that in all the hydrological setup, especially the Ghana Hydrological Service, they must train hydrologists to be part of all the aspects of the engineering regime in this country, especially in the regions.
So let's look at this. It's a very fair point you've made, and as a country, it appears we've not averted our minds to this. Hopefully, the authorities listening to us, and they do watch us, will now start focusing on that, and of course, also have systems here, because I feel it's a failure even in our educational system, such that we've not established courses. Like you say, you are not even trained in the country. For a country with a problem like ours, our tertiary educational systems should have had courses on hydrology. But let's move a notch from there. We know that per the Auditor General's report, the Hydrological Services Department has failed to come up with drainage master plans, or DMPs. We also know that as far as, retention ponds, and I'll be talking about them, the statistic, that's why I'm bringing this up. In terms of retention ponds, we know what they do in terms of surface water and how they help, mitigate flooding. But when you look at the Auditor General's report, what it evinces, you would see that when it comes to the construction of drains between 2015 and 2019, in kilometers, what was our target was 110 kilometers. We only succeeded in delivering 12.2. Then you look at the retention ponds I speak of. We targeted 18 and we delivered 0. So even where we have planned, there's nothing to write home about. How does that strike you?
Well, that is the pain. You see, that's why I was talking about the current leadership at there. I remember when I joined this hydrological service in 1988, you used to have sections. You used to have sections. You have the coastal defense section, you have the drilling system section, and you have the operation hydrology section. So each of these sections were doing their work. Currently, as we sit, I doubt whether the drainage section is even working or the operation hydrology section is working. Most of the works has been the coastal defense works. And because we don't put so much emphasis on the drainage and the operation hydrology, that is the challenge that you are talking about. So for me, I think that the hierarchy of the hydrological service now must be seen to be going back to where we were at the time that I joined in 1988. And you see that at the time, I'm not saying that during the time there was no flood, but each of these compartments had a role to play. And what they were doing was that if it comes to the drainage system, you have somebody who is in charge, somebody who is responsible. The person will be taking care of all the drainage aspects of the, either in the city or the whole nation. And you have replica sections in the various regions. But as we sit now, if you go to even the commercial hydrological service, there are only 3 personnel in the department. 3, and 2 of them are technicians. And there's only 1 engineer who even has gone on retirement, but because of don't have the personnel, he's helping the agency to work.
Wow.
And it cuts across the whole nation. So if you have such a regime, why wouldn't you have the challenges that we're having? Because when I joined, and I was at a certain point, I was the head of the commercial office. We used to have about 10 personnel, more than sometimes. Some of them are going to the field to work. Some are going to Sunyani. We had a lot of work to do. But now, there's nothing to write home about.
So in other words, what you're saying, Doc, is that there is a clear lack of seriousness in dealing with this problem.
That's the point I'm trying to make. And I was there last week. I went there to visit because some of them were all my juniors at the time that I was there working there. I nearly wept to see that this huge place that we used to have has turned to be like a ghost town. And the operation hydrology has even been gone completely, because we used to monitor all the urban waters. Okay, we were putting gauges to monitor. We were doing discharge measurements, and all these are not happening anymore. There's nothing. So if there's flood, you don't even know the type of water system which will take care of the flooding, because you don't monitor anything.
Right. Dr. Twumasi, do hold for me. Do hold for me. Let me bring in Dr. Achia Darkwa, who is a road consultant. Dr. Darkwa, can you hear me, sir? All right. So it appears we've lost Dr. Achia Darkwa, but let me come back to Engineer Mahama. So I was about to pose that question to Dr. Darkwa, but you fit the bill as well. No roads are constructed without drainage systems in any, properly thinking part of the world. I mean, but you look at our drainage systems, there were quite a number of problems. When you look at the Auditor General's report again, some points that are raised from 2015 to 2019, the HSD, the Hydrological Services Department, fell short of implementing their target of drainage facilities needed to mitigate flooding nationwide. That is my first point. The second one being that there is a shortage of allocation of funds. And then you would look again at the fact that the Ministry of Finance, time and again, does not release the funds on time. You were hinting at that concerning the Minister for Water, Sanitation and Water Resources, Cecilia Abnadapa. When you look at this mix, what picture does it paint? For Dr. Twumasi, he says there's a clear lack of seriousness. Is that the same feeling you have?
Well, I've been saying this over the years, so I'm not surprised that he's making the same comment. He is a hydrologist. I am a civil engineer with about 3 or 4 special areas, like materials, which has something to link with hydrology, because it has to do with percolation, soil type, the soil texture, which soil can take the water, which soil cannot take the water in terms of how long it will take for some water to seep through the ground. clay is an example. If your area is dominated by clay, obviously you know that if it rains, no matter how dry the clay is, it will take some time before the clay would absorb the water because of the minute pore that it has. If you are dealing with a gravel area or a granular material, the infiltration of the water into the soil is much faster and higher. So if Accra, maybe a portion of Accra is predominant to be a clay land like Pram, part of Accra, highly swampy material, the water would have been going down faster if it was granular material or weathered material. Now, almost all the roads that we construct in the country, like the ones that I participated in as a consultant and a supervisor, we have a hydrologist who is part of the team. Most of the team is about 8 or so professionals. There is a structural engineer when there are bridges and drainages or what they call culverts to be designed. There are drainage issues where the hydrologist is part of the team. We have the materials engineer. We have the highway engineer or the traffic engineer. We have the resident engineer who's supposed to supervise everything underneath him. So the water, as in the catchment area, the expected or anticipated water that is expected to be generated by the adjoining lands is also factored, especially, you see, the road design is not necessarily supposed to capture all water around it. When the road or the elevation is already higher, what we call the direct watershed, the lands that are more lower than the road, they don't pose a danger to the highway. So the design is primarily to capture the water on the surface of the road, as in the carriageway, get it off the road into the drain, and look at the possible area for it to be discharged. The volume of water that is generated from the road is significantly low. But when you have high elevated lands around the road or along the road, then you have to look at how much volume of water you anticipate to get onto the road. And that would inform you about 2 factors: the water from the road, the water from the adjoining land, which are higher, into the drain and to be discharged to a location which is satisfactory or which has the capacity to take the anticipated or designed water. And so all these are factored. Now, I've said that when that is done, and let's say a road is completed, and first 2, 3, 4 years, the road is not flooding, and suddenly the road begins to flood, you have to ask yourself, what has caused the immediate or sudden change in the direction of the water flow? It could be that the assemblies must have given permit for buildings to be sited in areas to obstruct the flow of the water. And that is what we are beginning to see, that mostly roads which are highly elevated, higher than the adjoining land, do not create or cause any flood. Now, before my doctor rightly said, I haven't come across any hydrologists at the assembly, even though they also construct drains. There's no hydrologists that I've come across at the assembly. But we, the private consultants, if we don't have one, in most instances, we hire the service of a hydrologist because of the importance of the road that you are constructing, especially when the road is in a built-up area or it's an area that you suspect by the experience and information you have that it may be creating or causing so much, a flood along the corridors of the road. So I see government hasn't taken so much holding the bull by the neck to ensure that we address this issue. One of the things you have to know is that when I visited the Hydrological Service Department in the year 2001 to do a lot of extensive studies about flood, the engineer then was Engineer Wise Ametepe, who had retired now. And he's now a consultant to the Western Housing Ministry. So to buttress what Doctor was saying, a man in Kumasi is also on retirement and is a consultant. That should tell you the lack of professionals that we have in that field. But because of our vested knowledge in our construction, both on roads and buildings and the flood mitigations or management, that is why we have gotten to this stage where we can speak with facts based on what we have done over the years. But we don't have them in this country. None of them are seen across the country in any of the districts I've visited, either as an unofficial member for meetings or to make inquiries. None is in all the assemblies that we have across the country.
Engineer Mahama, hold for me. Let me bring in Dr. Chumesi as well. You have criticized the lack of seriousness in this entire enterprise, but here is the cost of it in terms of the impact. We'll look at the actual cost, but how has it affected individuals? How has it affected farmlands and all of that? Just follow me with this statistic. According to the Auditor General's report, flooding just between 2015 and 2019, in terms of the total recorded floods, we are looking at 1,446, injuries 309, and deaths 510. You look at houses that have been inundated, 54,744, and then farmlands destroyed, 136,563. Stay with me here because I'm looking at a pattern. July 4, 1968, heavy rainfall, one of the worst at the time in 9 years, caused disaster. You would think that from 1964 to 2022, a lot would have changed. 71, the twin cities of Sekandi, Takrade affected. Houses were basically flooded, inundated, broke down. 1995, you see the trajectory. 1997, Accra floods. 1999, 2001, June 28th, one of the worst we've seen in Accra. You come to 2007, and the list just goes on and on and on. You go to the Upper West some years back, 1999, and this flood actually affected 300,000 people. So it begs the question, apart from our lack of so many resources, including hydrologists, do we even have the will to solve the problem? Do you see that? Hello, Dr. Chumesi.
May not be maybe like what you are suggesting, but it appears to be like that. Apparently, that's what, because as the engineer was saying, he is gone to almost all districts. There's no a single hydrologist. And that shows that we are not up to the task. And more so, if this thing has been happening yearly, maybe every 2 years it happens, there should have been concrete ways to address the challenge. But it has not been there. There's completely lack of interest in addressing this challenge. It can't be permanent, as it has been like this for since 1960. Or I was reading some document, even around 1968, in my area, there was a lot of flood. And up to now, we seem to be sitting down, waiting for that, oh, let's pray that it doesn't happen. But it happens all the time. So I think that the first point is that let's look at the hydrological issues, especially in terms of the hydrology of as the engineer was saying, they're engineers, the interest is that let's look at this formula, rational formula, let's do this, and then we come up to this solution. But that may not be the natural phenomenon that is occurring. It's the hydrologists who will come up with the proper the natural phenomenon so that they can actually advise the engineer to say that, look, these volumes that you are using for your drainage system may not necessarily be so. Or you can even educate people that if you look at because rainfall and runoff are just like there's a relationship between them. So if you know the rainfall, hydrology will know the impact of the runoff which might come. And how much does it take in training hydrologists? In Africa here, I think even in Africa, there's an institute. If you go to the University of Nairobi, where I was also trained in the early 90s, I was trained in the University of Nairobi. Even now, they have programs that they can train hydrologists. Why are we not taking advantage of some of these things? That let's train a few people. Let's say that even the government service, you have even 10, so that one can be in any of the regions, or maybe 16. So that at least if they cannot be in the districts, they can be in the region, so that if each district wants a hydrologist, they can go and attend meetings as the engineer was suggesting. But I decided not to think through on that issue because our interest is that it's engineering solution. It is not. It is not an engineering solution. It is more to do with the hydrology of the system. And I'm not government, but if you look at the way government has just been looking at the flood every year, NADMO will say that people are placed who have been you go and pay, and after 3 months, you forget about that. If the hydrologist in this country, nobody even thinks that you are important to come and speak on issues for some time now, and except maybe John, who has even invited me. I think this is the second or the third time to speak about some of these issues. Okay, no one cares.
So we only come to the problem when there is a problem. I mean, we're knee-jerk reacting people. When there is a problem, then we make a lot of noise about it, and then once the conversation dies down, those who are in authority who should be doing something also go to sleep.
That's the thing, and that is the pain. That if you look at as you said, the cost of the flooding and even the cost of training. You see that there's a lot of disparity. If you take the people who are drowned, human beings cannot bring them back. If you take the houses which have gone, you cannot bring them back. We take the full security issues. If you look at the cost of all those, vis-a-vis the cost of training, even 10 hydrologists, it may be about 100 or 1 million of it is going to the training.
Right. And you're referencing where it talks about, I'll be going to Engineer Mahama now, but just to cap off, Dr. Chumesi, you are referencing what it says, that for every dollar that we spend in terms of flood risk reduction, we'd be saving between $4 and $9 when it comes to what we would spend on managing the disaster. So forestalling the disaster versus managing the disaster. And it makes for stark analysis. It appears when we're dealing with floods, in terms of this flooding situation, we are penny wise and pound foolish, because where we should be investing money, like having more hydrologists, like building systems, we're failing in that. But let me come to Engineer Mahama on this beat. If you followed what Dr. Chumesi said, it would also paint the picture. We have climate change. And it means that things are going to get worse. There are going to be more climatic challenges moving forward. But then we also look at our response. I've just been taking a look at the United Nations Environmental Program and some of what more developed countries have been doing, from managing rivers or water bodies, levees, reservoirs, veers, and all of that, and how they manage these in the developed world. It said that you shouldn't reinvent the wheel. What are some of the things, best practices we can learn from whether neighboring countries or the developed world, so that we can mitigate the situation once and for all? Engineer Mahama, maybe you'd have to unmute so we can hear you.
Yeah, sorry. I'm saying that these are solutions that are always on the table of government. The Europeans did not learn any book, contract, or different from what we have learned. The same principle, same method, same approach is supposed to be adhered to. Before I just do that, Doctor was talking about the fact that it's not an engineering problem, but it's a hydrology problem. My only comment on that is that hydrologists are hydrological engineers, so they are part. So it's an engineering field to the hydrology, but they are hydrological engineers who are part of the design of any road or any landscape. So he is an hydrologist, but they are engineers. They are part of the engineering bracket. That's why they take their their professional certificate from the Government of Engineering. So that's by the way. And secondly, I said in my the intro, that we are confronted with two challenges: upstream coming with their flash floods or the waters, and then the sea, where we are supposed to have some relief, is also coming up with the water, the rise of the sea levels, also eating our land, taking our land forcefully because of our approach towards getting the defense done. One of the things I want to quickly bring in is that now, because we are in Accra, that's why we are talking about Accra floods in particular. You made mention of Takoradi and a few others. Koforidua, Kumasi, and by far almost all the regional capitals are flooding. That brings the question about one district, one dam. I don't see the sense in getting the northern part of the country to have droughts when we don't have the rains, and then we have floods when the rains come. That gives a question to myself and Dr. Chumesi to ask officialdom, what was the nature of the dams that were constructed or are being constructed in the northern region? Not only for farming, so in one way or the other, the one district, one dam is a pond. The 18 pond we are trying to do in Accra, in the northern regions, it's a pond which is supposed to serve one, to get the water to be stored there, in order for the water not to just inundate the environment or the lands. And secondly, when it's stored there, it is used for agricultural purposes. How come that these dams are constructed and within a matter of 3 months, 4 months after the rains, these dams go dry? And then we are waiting, first and foremost, the water coming from the skies, and secondly, when the Bagre Dam is filled to its capacity by the design that they have, they spill the water, and then we have two problems. One, the first one is the rain, which is natural. The second one, I'll call it artificial, because they have gotten the capacity that they want, and when they open to spill the water, the northern region is flooded.
It is no surprise, is it? Because recently I hosted a climate, concerned person, let me just put it that way, an activist who mentioned that even when you look at our dams across the country, I forget the statistic, but over 50% of them are flood prone. The dams themselves, I'm talking about the major dams we have in the country. That points to the very issue you're raising, which is problematic as well.
So let's say Dr. Chumesi and Kumasi and myself and a few others, and then the contractors under whichever department were asked or tasked were contracted and awarded contracts to handle over thousands of dams in the north. And these dams, most of them are dry. And there's nobody to be concerned that, apart from the fact that we are trying to do a policy of government, what is a bigger rationale behind the dams? Now, there are two things one it comes to. I made some mention of something, but you are probably because you're not an engineer. I said that the texture of the soil determines the extent of infiltration of the water. Now, if you go to the whole northern part of the country, because this issue, let's start to body because it's not really Accra. Once we are, because of Accra's per capita income, the people we have in Accra, even though it's so devastating, the north or any other region with their low, in terms of, cash, when they have this impact, you cannot quantify that in terms of how it affects the people. Now, if you're going to do these dams in the northern regions, ostensibly to get water for irrigation purposes, and then these people they receive massive flood or they are affected by the floods, and then just after the floods, 2 months after, these dams dry up. There are two things involved. Now, what was the depth or the design of the dams? Were there any hydrologists like Dr. Chumesi added to almost all the designs who were done, or was there any what we call vetting of those designs? Because you need to get the terrain of the land, how the water is flowing. Some of them might be channeled artificially, how the history of the area where we have the floods, and whether there are no buildings there that it will be disadvantage for government, because you have to do some demolition to create those buffer or dams within those locations. Right. In the event where those lands are fairly flat or they are bare, right, it means that you can only compensate for the parcel of land, but not buildings. Were they factored in the design? And secondly, when we met areas which were porous, as in the granular material, which we know that when the waters are captured within that area, within a matter of a month or two, because of the high infiltration, this water will all be taken underneath the ground. So was there any cladding of all this surface which are already porous, so that once the rains are done or they are gone, the water can be retained over a year? We need to ask questions with a bit of anger, that we need answers from whatever policy which is supposed to help the country, but it's less like a shade. It comes within the flats and it exits without anybody getting to know.
Right. Thank you for those very pointed comments. Let me bring in Dr. Chumesi to give your final comments on the way forward. I'm sure you'll be telling us that we definitely need more hydrologists. But as you do that, consider this. $780 million. That is what we have lost on the back of the economic damage of flooding. And in fact, over the last 10 years, every year we have experienced flooding. The $780 million I'm talking about is the equivalent of about 5.8 billion Ghana cedis, almost 6 billion. And it's interesting, isn't it? Because that is also what we're looking at when it comes to the revised figures for the e-levy. So you see how big a problem this is. But for you, in just about a minute, if you can, Dr. Twumasi, what are the relevant things we should be looking at to solve this problem? Hello, Dr. Twumasi. Please unmute for me. Hello, Dr. Twumasi.
Yes, sir.
Right. Did you get the question?
Yeah, I got the question. And what I would suggest is that because now, if I'm going to talk about training, that's not the point now. We need to look at the environmental issues also. For example, this disposal of solid waste. I think there are even some management issues even on the solid waste system where people are going to, I think now we have some of these companies coming up who deal with this waste to energy issue, so that most of the solid waste that we try to dispose of, they may end up in factories for us to use them for some purposes. And also, like the engineer was saying, what we need to also to do is also to look at the facilities and government also commitment. We need to be asking questions, as he was saying, about what the government is doing, so that we can also actually come up with proper solutions. And currently, if you come to Kumasi and other areas, you see all the vegetation is going, and even the wetlands, which are supposed to take care of these flooded waters, are also going away. You see people so we need to change this attitude of the urban planning aspect, so that we don't do what we are doing now. And then we also have to do a lot more studies on the rainfall patterns as respect of climate change, so that we can actually take care of these issues properly. But for now, I think the major issue will be to look at the planning, vegetative cover, drainage systems, and how we dump waste into the drainage systems, and education of the people to stop throwing waste into the environment. And then maybe each district must also look at how they can also come up with the help of the few hydrologists around, so that we can educate them and show them the way to address some of these challenges.
I just had to bring this in, and it's just a parting comment. I think it was Engineer Mahama that I heard some time back recently saying that when it comes to the flooding situation, what is contributed by people even dumping this or dumping that in drainage systems is just about 4 or 5% of the problem or less. Engineer Mahama, can you confirm that for me? Hello, Engineer Mahama. All right, it appears. Can you hear me now, Engineer Mahama?
I can hear you. I can hear you loud and clear.
Yes, we're done with the conversation. I was just saying, on the back of what Dr. Twumasi said about people not dumping, I think I heard you recently talking about the fact that even people dumping indiscriminately just contributes about 4 to 5% of the real problem. And that points to the fact that there's a major problem apart from people dumping in places they shouldn't be dumping refuse and all of that. Is that correct?
Yes, I was specific with the Odo itself.
All right.
I was dealing with the capacity of the Odo, which is about 80% silted, right, which has reduced the capacity, and then the floating object on the surface of the Odo, which is quite insignificant in terms of what is causing the incapacitation of the capacity of the Odo to function as designed.
Gentlemen, we're immensely grateful that you took the time to join us this morning. Of course, we had Dr. Anthony Twumasi, hydrologist with the Kumasi Technical University, and he makes a stark point. We have just about 10 hydrologists in the country, a country that faces flooding year in, year out. And we don't even have systems to train hydrologists. Do you have 1 second for us?
Do you have 1 second for us?
All right, go ahead.
In the Auditor General's report, you realize that a lot of pictures were taken And at most of the culverts where the outlet of the culverts are located, you will see a lot of service lines, GWCL lines, pipes crossing at almost the centers of where we have the outlet of the culvert. And when those pipes are crossing horizontally, they become a block to the water. And any debris or any rubber or any grass or tree that comes out of the culvert is blocked there. That's why you have something we call localized and sectional floods. So Ghana Water Company and ECG, when they are doing, especially Ghana Water, when they are constructing their pipes across culvert areas, it's either they go underneath the base of the culvert or on top of the side of the window, so that they will not obstruct the water that comes with all the debris that goes across the culvert. That's very, very important.
Thank you for that point, Engineer Abdullahi Mahama, a road consultant there. It's interesting that he talks about water, because as we get into our second belt, that's exactly what we're going to be focusing on. We're talking about the Ghana Water Company Limited, among others, and the pollution to our water bodies on the back of illegal mining. What is the impact, and how do we get out of this situation? Turbidity levels and more, and how difficult it is to even get potable water. That conversation will be up next, even as we take your views later on as we hit the streets of Kaneshie. Do stay with us.